A recent interview with Jimmie Johnson detailed exactly when his relationship with Chad Knaus started to fracture and what ultimately led to them splitting up after 2018. Interesting show ahead of us. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. Kind of a different episode today, but should be a lot of fun. Later today, I know they got Johnny Sauter's suspension announcement's going to happen tonight. I think tomorrow, Ross Chastain and Nice Motorsports, their appeal is going to be heard. We have to talk about Sonoma this weekend with the new configuration. Darrell Waltrip's calling his last race with Fox this weekend. So there's a lot of stuff we'll talk about later on in this week, of course. But today I wanted to take some time and talk about an article I read yesterday, as well as a couple other things as well. But focus on this article I read about Jimmie Johnson, because when we talk about Jimmie Johnson, a NASCAR, 7-time champion, arguably the greatest driver in NASCAR history. I think most people would at least say top 5, top 3. He has fallen from grace, and I'm not going to dwell on this too much because I know Jimmie Johnson fans and all NASCAR fans alike are pretty aware of his recent struggles, at least by Jimmie Johnson standards. But this guy went from winning a championship in 2016 to now he has not won a race in more than 2 years. He is on a 74-race winless streak. And I'm not counting the win in the Clash earlier this year. I mean, that was great for him, good for him and his new sponsor, but it doesn't technically count as a points win. But anyway, what I thought was interesting to talk about today was an article I read yesterday from the San Francisco Chronicle. And in this article, Jimmie Johnson actually kind of gets a little more candid about what led to him and Chad Knaus ultimately splitting at the end of last season. Chad Knaus and Jimmie Johnson were crew chief driver, a perfect pair for 17 years, won over 80 races, 7 championships, but after last season, they decided to split up. Chad Knaus now is the crew chief for William Byron, Jimmie Johnson has Kevin Mendering over on that 48 car. And so what led to this split? Well, according to Jimmie Johnson, in this San Francisco Chronicle article, he said that there were cracks in their relationship as early as 2015. 2015 was an up and down year for Jimmie Johnson. He did get 5 wins, but he was eliminated in the round of 12 for the second year in a row, so kind of an early exit. Here's what Jimmie Johnson said in that interview. From the article, until 2015, he said he and Knaus were always able to get mad at each other and work harder and make ourselves better and faster. In 2015, with all the pushing and all the work and all the effort, we could not put speed in our cars. That put a lot of pressure on our relationship, and I think that led to fractures at that point. Now, Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus, it's been well documented, have always kind of had a bit of an abrasive relationship with each other. We've heard radio communications or interviews. The two, often argue with each other on and off the racetrack, but usually we're able to find a common ground, and we're obviously both very talented and did a lot of great things in NASCAR. But I do find it very interesting that in this interview, Johnson specifies that 2015, almost 4 years ago, I guess, was kind of the start of maybe the end of that relationship. And what I find most interesting is despite these cracks, as he says, the very next year, 2016, Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus came right back out and won the championship that year. So they were able to put whatever issues they had maybe to rest and went out and won another championship, a record-tying championship. But just as our history lesson here, 2017 did not go as well for Jimmie Johnson. Started out pretty well. They had 3 wins in the Fox first half portion of the season, but then went winless the entire second half and didn't make any noise in the playoffs. And Jimmie Johnson actually set record lows that year, career lows, in top 5s and top 10s. And here's what Jimmie Johnson said in that interview about 2017 specifically. But when we got back into 2017, it felt a lot like 2015. All this work and effort and not being where we needed to be, it tore down what our relationship was. In 2018, we decided we needed to make a change. Obviously, we know the story about 2018, didn't win any races and actually was eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. And then, of course, at the end of that season, they announced that Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus would not be working together this year, so 2018 was not a good season, but focusing again on those earlier years before the ultimate kind of downfall, I think this says a lot about, the kind of perfectionist mindset that both Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus kind of exhibit here. Ever since their rookie seasons together back in the early 2000s, they've dominated. They've won races every year. They've continually got better, it seems. They won 5 straight championships together. It just felt like things were always working for Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus, and I find it very interesting that the moment things started to feel a little rocky, 2015. Because like I said, 2015, they still won 5 races. And Jimmie Johnson was saying there were cracks in their relationship because they only won 5 races and were, 10th or 11th in points. 5 wins and a 10th or 11th place finish in points would be a great year for pretty much every driver ever in NASCAR history, but not for Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus. It sounds to me like personally, like on the personal side of things, their relationship still was fine. It was purely professional. Whenever you start struggling a little bit more than in recent years, you try to figure out what's wrong, and if you don't agree on what's wrong, often that can lead to a split. Pro athletes all the time are perfectionists, of their craft. They don't settle for anything less than the best that they have to offer, and it sounds to me like Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus knew really early on what their best was, and their best was 5 straight championships. And the moment things started to look even just a tiny bit less than that, that led to questions and questioning. Now, ultimately, what I think this means is this was still the right decision, splitting Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus. I think this was still the best decision, honestly, for Hendrick Motorsports in the long run. Like I said, this year, Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus are working with younger, more inexperienced drivers and crew chiefs. This year, you got Chad Knaus working with William Byron. You have Jimmie Johnson working with Kevin Mendring. Jimmie Johnson's contract's up after 2020. I think Knaus's contract might be up after that as well. I'm not certain. But my thought process is Johnson, they'll work with each other for 2 years, and then in 2021, Johnson kind of goes away. Knaus maybe steps into a different role, and then you pair up William Byron and Kevin Mendring, both with the knowledge of the 7-time champions, and they're going to go win races for a decade or something like that. I think that's what Rick Hendrick's thinking, and I don't know if it'll work out exactly that way, but I think that's a smart way to do it. So ultimately, last year when it was announced that Johnson and Knaus were going to split up, I thought this was a good move for them business-wise, for Rick Hendrick at least, big business-wise, because it was a long-term investment into his future. But now it sounds like behind the scenes, it was more Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus's mutual decision to maybe just split up at that point. Now, a lot of people like to question Jimmie Johnson's, desire to win and everything, since he has not won in 2 years, at least not a points-paying race. Jimmie Johnson did say in that interview that his desire to compete is still very much alive, and as long as that is the case, he doesn't see retirement in his near future. I still think that when his contract is up in a year and a half, he'll likely be done full-time, at least in NASCAR. He might go race some other things here and there. He's hinted that he'd like to try an IndyCar road course race at some point, maybe go back and race some other events as well. But I still think after 2020, Johnson's Cup career is likely over. But from his words, at least, he says, nope, the desire to compete is still very much alive. He just ran a marathon a few months ago, so he's in great shape. Jimmie Johnson still believes he is at the top of his game. The results just have not been there the last couple of years. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting. If you're a Jimmie Johnson fan or a Hendrick fan, maybe you found that interesting. I really thought that when Johnson and Knaus split up, I thought it was Rick Hendrick coming in and saying, hey, this is what we need to do for our future success. It sounds more like, no, Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus, just eventually the little scuffles they got into, I guess, got a little worse, and it was a time for a change. But I thought that was very interesting. Cool to see Jimmie Johnson kind of be a little more honest in an interview like that and actually talk about some of the behind-the-scenes issues. You don't see NASCAR drivers talk about that very often, so I'll give him a lot of credit there. But I have one other thing I want to talk about in this episode. It's not NASCAR Cup Series related, not even Xfinity or Trucks related. It's K&N Pro Series West related. This weekend, Saturday afternoon, as a matter of fact, at 4:30 Eastern Time, the NASCAR K&N Pro Series West will be racing at Sonoma the same weekend as the Cup race. It'll kind of be the partner event, the accompanying event for the Cup Series race this weekend, and the entry list for this race is huge. There's a lot of up-and-coming stars, a lot of established NASCAR stars in this race trying to get more experience. It might be one worth watching. Now, throwing this disclaimer, I think they usually show K&N races like a week later on NBCSN, but if you want to watch it live at 4:30 Eastern Time on Saturday, fanschoice.tv is you can watch it for free. I think you just have to sign up with an email, but you don't have to pay anything. You can watch K&N races for free, so I recommend that, assuming they're doing that this weekend. But yeah, there are 33 cars on the entry list for this race, and just for comparison, most average short track K&N races maybe have 20, 22 cars. That's because a lot of NASCAR guys brought their own stuff for this one. So let's talk about some of the most notable drivers on this entry list, why I think this one will be worth watching. Obviously, there's some K&N regulars, some up-and-coming prospects. Drivers like Haley Deegan, Derek Kraus, Trevor Huddleston, Brittany Zamora, Jager Jones. But then there are also a few Xfinity and Cup Series regulars. Austin Dillon, Ryan Preece, Noah Gragson, Cole Custer, and Austin Dillon. So both RCR Cup guys are racing this weekend. Now, worth mentioning, Ryan Preece, Daniel Hemrick have never raced anything at Sonoma Raceway, and also since they're bringing back the carousel, the full 2.5-mile layout here for Sonoma this weekend, actually none of these drivers that I just named have raced this configuration. Cup, Xfinity, no one has. They haven't run this configuration of Sonoma in the Cup Series at least in, I think, more than 20 years, something like late 90s. I think 98 might have been the last year. I'm not sure if that was Cup Series who raced it then. So it's a slightly new animal for all the drivers that'll be racing on Sunday, and it looks like a couple drivers, and I think this is interesting too, that like Noah Gragson, Cole Custer, because the Xfinity Series doesn't race at Sonoma at all. Obviously, those are two drivers that hope to be in the Cup Series in the next couple of years, so they're getting some worthwhile experience anyways, but I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I think we've seen this before in the K&N Series at tracks like Sonoma, where we'll see top drivers step into lower series to get extra practice, extra work in. I think that's very important. I honestly thought maybe a few more Cup Series guys would step into this race, someone like a William Byron or an Alex Bowman, maybe a Bubba Wallace, because like I said, with the carousel in play, we have not raced that in the Cup Series in a long, long time. So it's not a completely new racetrack, but it is a good third of it is kind of new, so it might present some interesting challenges on Sunday. But yeah, I think Saturday's race will be a fun one to watch as well. 4:30 Eastern Time, I believe. Fans Choice TV. Take a look and watch the K&N Pro Series West race at Sonoma. Some top young prospects that we've talked about on the show recently. Some drama there, perhaps, as well as a few established NASCAR stars. Could be really interesting to watch. I think it will be. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one this weekend. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this show. Just wanted to make you guys aware of that because I will be watching. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember, you can follow me on Instagram, you can follow me on Twitter, all that jazz. And then, of course, big thank you to my Patreon supporters. You know who they are. Michael Harrison at Duos of the Stars, Mentally Defective, Cameron James, John Koblenz, Jason Arlong, Wesley Donaldson, Isaac Dennison, Mika Suzuki, iFantasyRace.com, TheRacingInsiders.com, Pepe Luscious, Matthew Koulopoulos, Adam Lean, and the rest of these amazing sponsors, amazing supporters over there on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support me and support the show. I could not do this without you, so thank you so much. Get really good at doing that. I'm just like a NASCAR driver reciting all of his sponsors from memory after they win a race at this point. But thank you guys for the support, and thank you all of you for watching. If you missed my last episode, we've just recently hit 90,000 subscribers, which is incredible. Thank you guys so much for that. Hopefully we can bump that needle up and get to 100K before the end of the year. That would be absolutely mind-blowing if that could happen. So thank you guys so much for the support. I really appreciate it. Share this with the NASCAR fans in your life, and let's go race, everyone. Should be a great weekend. Road course racing for the first time this year. I'm excited. I'll have a couple more videos up between now and then, but should be a good one. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you again very, very soon.